Welcome to the first lecture about web design. I hope you already downloaded your copy of the course ebook. If you didn't, you should do that right now. It is in the previous lecture. So beside all the things you will learn in the course, I also share a lot of resources with you in the course ebook as we go over the different topics of this course. These will make your life as a web designer a lot easier. This ebook actually contains material that is not covered in this course, but in my other course, which is about web design and web development. So take a look at that material as well. Now before we start, let's first distinguish between web designer and web developer. The designer is the one who creates the look and feel of the website. The developer then actually builds a website based on the design from the designer. A front-end developer uses languages such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for the front end, which is the visible part of the website. Now the lines between designers and developers are becoming more blurred as learning to code is getting easier for designers and designing is getting easier to developers. So if you're already familiar with HTML and CSS or Photoshop or some other graphical software, you can take the guidelines and rules you will learn in this course and start using them today to design beautiful websites. Now there's actually a good reason why it's getting easier to get started with web design. And I'm talking about flat design, which is the big new design trend popularized by Microsoft and Apple. The introduction of flat design completely changed the way we design today. I will explain this based here on Apple's iOS that we can see here in this picture. So on the left side you have the old iOS 6 with all those shadows, color gradients, textures and bevels. On the right side the new iOS 7 look and feel. Now flat design gets rid of all those shadows, color gradients, textures and so on, leaving us with a two-dimensional design without losing the functionality. Most people perceive flat design as being simple, clean and modern. I personally think that the interface on the right side looks really much cleaner and more elegant as well. Or maybe look at these two login forms. I mean, would you find it easier to design the left or the right interface? And that's what I'm talking about. So this is a huge opportunity for new designers just like you. Or look at these beautiful flat web designs. Now I'm not saying that it's easy to design these sites, because it really is not. But for a complete beginner, I think it's easier to get started with this type of design because it's technically easier to do. You will see lots of websites like these over the next lectures. So that's it about the introduction to web design. I think it's very important that you start to get a feeling for what's happening in the world of web design right now. So that's why I gave you this short introduction. And now we will start learning some guidelines about typography. Make sure you don't miss them. Welcome back. This is our very important lecture about typography. According to Wikipedia, typography is the art and technique of arranging type to make written language readable and beautiful. This means that typography is an essential part of any design. And that's because most of your website will be text content. And so it's quite important to make that content good looking and easy to read for the user. Good typography can make every design look very professional. So let's look at a couple of guidelines to achieve exactly that. I will start with some simple rules, and after that I will go over choosing some good fonts, how to get them, and how to choose the right font for your website. For the first couple of guidelines, I will use this website to show you good and bad things. So first, use a font size between 15 and 25 pixels for body text. It really depends on the typeface you choose, how much text you got and how much you want that text to stand out. Here in this example, we have a font size of 22 pixels and it looks really good. And this is what it looks like without using these guidelines. The first example has only 14 pixels font size and it's clearly way too small, right? And down here in the second paragraph, the text looks unnaturally big and exaggerated with those 30 pixels font size. So avoid both of these situations. Now for headlines and titles, you can and should of course use bigger font sizes to show that it's important text that you really want the user to read. There are no real size limits for headlines like this one. So here we have the headline of the website we've been seeing before, and it has a font size of 60 pixels, and I think it looks great actually. This website here has an extremely big headline with 90 pixels font size. And sometimes when you use such a big headline, you will want to decrease the font weight of that text. This ensures that the text doesn't steal too much attention from the rest of the content, and it makes the text look less bulky and more modern and elegant. And that is exactly what this website here is doing right. Next up, use a line spacing between 120 and 150% of the font size. Line spacing is the vertical distance between lines and makes text easier to read. Back to our example, this web page here uses a line spacing of 150% to make the text easy to read. This is an example of good typography. And this is what it looks like with bad typography. With 100% line spacing, which is what happens when you don't define any line spacing at all, you see this big block of text which is not easy to read because the lines almost overlap. This is a really bad practice. Now with 200%, it's also not pleasant to read the text because it's way too spaced out and our eyes have a difficult time processing the text like this. So leave a line spacing between 120 and 150% and you will be fine. 45 to 90 characters per line is the optimal line length that is easy to read. 45 to 90 characters is like 2 to 3 lowercase alphabets. Just as a reference for you. So here, for example, our first line has 78 characters, so it's easy to follow the text. And here again some bad examples. In the first example we have just 36 characters, and it looks kind of weird. You can of course do this if you have some columns with some text, but not in a situation like this with a lot of text. And down here, the text line is way too long, and our eyes find it difficult to travel such a long distance from the end of one line to the beginning of the next line. And finally, the most important thing is probably to choose good looking fonts. Now, there are no real rules for selecting the right font, but since this is a very practical guide, I will just tell you to use good fonts. I will show you a couple of good fonts that will look good in every design. You can use one of those, or of course go for some other font that you like better. But let's first distinguish between serif and sans serif typeface. On the left side, sans serif typefaces are more neutral, looking more clean and more simple. They are widely used in most modern websites or apps. On the other side, a serif typeface is one that has those small extensions or strokes called serifs at the end of the letters, just as you can see here on the right side. Serif typefaces are usually used for more traditional purposes that encourage long reading and storytelling. And this is how sans serif text looks like on an actual website. You're probably used to see sans serif text everywhere because it's more used than serif font styles. Also look how the heading uses bigger text, but with a very low font weight, as I explained you before. This website is absolutely beautiful and uses all the typography rules that I showed you before. And here are a couple of very good sans serif fonts available on Google Fonts. Now, Google Fonts is a very good free resource where you can get web fonts. And web fonts are fonts that you can include directly into your projects without having to download any files. All of these fonts you see here are broadly used, so you can't get wrong when choosing any of them. And Lato is actually the font that I use for this presentation in this course. Please take a look at the Google Fonts website. You can find it in the course ebook. And now serif fonts. Here is again the website we've been looking at before, because it's a great example of really beautiful use of a serif font, at least in the body part. For the headings, this website actually uses a serif font. So you see that you can actually mix serif and sans serif fonts in one website and make it look gorgeous. Here are 3 beautiful serif typefaces, also from Google Fonts. I encourage you to use these if you have a lot of text to show, like a blog website that should have a more traditional look. So, how should you actually choose a typeface? The most important thing is that the font you choose depends strongly on the website you're designing. You need to choose a font which best helps to reflect the look and feel you want for your website that you're designing. Because ultimately, the goal of choosing the right typeface is to engage your audience. Based on that, you can decide if you're better off with a sans serif or with a serif typeface. And after you decided that, use a good font. You can start with one of the ones that I showed you before. And if you're a complete beginner, then please only use one typeface. If you want to use more than one, please take a look at the course ebook. You will find a tool there which helps you pairing fonts, which means to choose 2 good fonts for a website. The best you can do is to play around with different typefaces and see which best helps to achieve what you want for your website. And that's it for typography. This was quite a long lecture actually. And next up, we have another very important aspect of web design: colors. So, join me right in the next lecture. Color is probably the most complicated area of user interface design. This is because we have a tendency to use colors that distract and feel completely unnatural. That can make our design look very messy. Do you want an example of this? Here you go. What do you say now? This is probably the worst website I have ever seen in my entire life. But this is obviously a joke, but you get the point, right? So let's try to avoid messy websites like this one with the guidelines I will show you in this lecture. The first thing I want to recommend is to use a single base color for your design. And with base color I mean any different color than black, white, or some shade of gray. If we want to build a clean and simple website, having too many colors in too many places all over our website is an easy way to completely screw up that goal. So sticking to one main color is definitely a good idea, especially if you're just starting out with design. And the colors you see here on this slide are from a tool called Flat UI Colors. Flat UI Colors is a very cool resource to choose your base color. To start out, I think you can't go wrong by choosing any of these colors. And besides fixing a base color, you can also create a darker or a lighter version of that color. Doing so, you can create a nice color palette like this one here. A color palette shows all the colors to be used in a certain design. I use a tool called 02-255 to create that darker and that light blue tones. I strongly recommend to create a color palette like this one for your design. As I said before, the gray tones are not considered base colors here, and we many times need some of them actually, for instance for text and for background colors. Find the link to these 2 tools I mentioned in the course ebook. Now, if you really want to mix up multiple colors, I recommend you to use a color wheel tool like Adobe Color CC or Peloton. These tools make use of color theory to choose the best color combinations for you. So for example, here with Adobe CC Color, you can create your color palettes using color combinations that actually make sense. Just play around with it and see what you get. You can then use a main color to draw attention to the most important elements on your web page, like a call to action button, and the second or third colors can complement the main color. That is just what this website is doing. Their main color is clearly green, but they have this nice orange to draw the attention to the button. And that brings us to the next guideline, which is about attention. When you're in doubt about using colors and don't know where to use colors and how often, I have a solution for you. Just pick a color that stands out and use it mostly to draw attention to a button or any other element of importance on your website. Uber's website here does a terrific job in doing exactly that. And number 4, and this is very simple, never choose the black color for any part of your design. This is because black actually almost never appears in the real world. So using complete black just doesn't feel natural. And last but not least, I want to say a few words on which colors you should actually choose for your design. That's because picking a color for a website means much more than picking your favorite color and turning it into a design. It means picking the right color in order to get the desired response from your audience. Color really makes a difference. This happens because there are psychological effects behind each color. So let's see what feelings each color can evoke and how to use this knowledge. Red is a great color to use when power, passion, strength, and excitement want to be transmitted. Brighter tones are more energetic, and darker shades are more powerful and elegant. Orange draws attention without being as overpowering as red. It means cheerfulness and creativity. Orange can be associated with friendliness, confidence, and courage. Now, yellow. Yellow is energetic and gives the feeling of happiness and liveliness. Also, it associates with curiosity, intelligence, brightness, etc. Green is the color of harmony, nature, life, and health. Also, it is often associated with money. In design, green can have a balancing and harmonizing effect. Next, blue means patience, peace, trustworthiness, and stability. It is one of the most beloved colors, especially by men. It is associated with professionalism, trust, and honor. And that's actually why the biggest social networks out there use the color blue. Now, purple is traditionally associated with power, nobility, and wealth. In your design, purple can give a sense of wisdom, royalty, nobility, luxury, and mystery. Pink expresses romance, passivity, care, peace, affection, etc. And finally, the color brown is the color of relaxation and confidence. Brown itself means earthiness, nature, durability, comfort, and reliability. And that's it for colors in this lecture. If you want to learn more on this subject, I included a couple of links in the course ebook where you can read all about color theory. Make sure you check them out. These days, big and beautiful images are everywhere in web design. In fact, using large background images can make your website look more attractive and create more user engagement. It has actually been found that image-heavy websites convert better, so that's great news. So you totally have to know how to work with images. And with that, I mean that you should learn how to effectively put text over images. There are a few techniques for doing this, and we are going to go through the most important of them in this lecture. First, the easiest way is to put text directly on an image. The problem is that this only works if the image is quite dark and your text is white. Otherwise, you will not have enough contrast between your image and your text. And that's exactly what happens in this website. I mean, I like the design, but the white text in the headline is quite difficult to read because the image is also quite bright. So I wouldn't encourage you to use this method because it can make text very difficult to read if you don't make it right. The easiest solution to this problem, we saw before, is to overlay the image with a color. The most usual and of course simple to use color is black, which simply turns the image darker, as in these two beautiful websites. But we can also use other colors as well and create some beautiful effects with them. And we can do even more. We can use color gradients to achieve stunning effects like these websites do. You can find a link to some beautiful color gradients in the course ebook. However, it is important that you keep in mind what we've learned about colors, which means that you should not just use some random colors, but you already know this by now, right? So please use image overlay with colors other than black or white very carefully. Next, simply putting the text in a box is another easy way to make your text stand out and easy to read, like the designer of this website did. The box should be opaque so that you can still see the image beneath it. In this case, a white color with some transparency was used. You can also make the box black or go with some other color that you selected for your design. Just be creative and you will be fine. Yet another solution to put text on images is image blur, and this is very powerful and also good looking in my opinion. You can either blur the whole image like these two websites do, or you can use an out of focus area of a photo as the blur, like the first of these two websites do. You see that? Now in this case, we need to make sure that the text stays on the blurred image part on all screen resolutions. This is particularly important for responsive web design. And now the last method I want to show you is the so-called floor fade. The floor fade is a technique where an image subtly fades towards black at the bottom, with white text written over it. This is the profile page of 500px.com, and this uses the floor fade extremely well. So it is almost unnoticeable, but still improving readability, which is exactly what we want. And this would be the same website, but without the floor fade. And in this case, we have a hard time reading some of the small white text down there. So the floor fade increases the text readability dramatically. This means that in situations like this, where we want text at the bottom of an image, this is the perfect solution to go for. Now you may ask, where do I get amazing images like the ones we saw in this lecture for my website? Well, you either already took some great photos for some website you're planning, or you can just get a lot of super cool free images on the internet. There are images for everything you can imagine. As always, I share the best resources with you in the course ebook. And this closes our lecture on working with images. In this lecture you saw a lot of great websites, and those can actually be a good inspiration for you and your websites. In this lecture, we will talk about how you should use icons in web design. Icons can be a very important part of a web designer's work. Icons improve the aesthetic of our websites and can provide a better user experience if well used. It is actually pretty incredible how much power icons have in determining the look and feel of an entire website. But icons can also cause user confusion when poorly used. This is why there are some very simple basic guidelines you should follow. First, you can use icons to show features of your website or a product that you're selling, or steps that a user should follow to achieve some goal. This is a powerful, modern, and beautiful way of showing what your site has to offer. Icons actually help the user to quickly browse through a page and get an idea what the website is all about. So I strongly recommend you to use icons in your design in these situations. And here you have some inspiration for how to use icons to show features of a website. The possibilities are endless, as you can see from all these examples. Or instead of showing features, you can use icons for actions and links. Popular websites like Facebook or YouTube do exactly this, and I'm sure you see this all the time. In the case you use icons for doing this, there are two rules to follow. First, your icons should be instantaneously recognizable and remove open interpretation. And second, label your icons if you have enough space to do so, because otherwise you may confuse your users. And whatever you do with icons, they should not take a center stage in your design. Instead, they should play a supporting role. For example, take this beautiful website. I know it's very small and you can't read the text actually, but what matters here is that it's not covered with icons everywhere. There are just these three icons that have like a supporting role, in this case to list the features of the product. Now, there are two types of icon formats: icons in form of images and icon fonts. Icon fonts use smooth vector images instead of common raster images to display icons on your website. I strongly recommend you to use icon fonts for web design whenever possible. And that's because vectors scale endlessly up or down for any resolution. This is especially important for today's high-resolution displays found in most smartphones and some computers such as the Retina Max. And don't worry, you don't have to design any icons by yourself, of course. As with images, there are tons of online resources where you can get free icon sets. And as before, I share some of them in the course ebook with you. Let's talk about another very important aspect of visual design: how to design a layout using whitespace. Every piece of good design uses whitespace well. In fact, if you want to make a website that looks designed, you need a lot of whitespace in the correct places on your site. So, what is whitespace? Whitespace is just space where there isn't any stuff. Easy. Whitespace absolutely is the key to create a clean and simple look and feel. This website uses whitespace quite well. Look at the space between the icons and the text, the space between sections, between the section's headings and its content, and between paragraphs. This makes the website look clean and inviting, all because it uses whitespace in a well-executed way. And this is the same website but without whitespace. Do you see the big difference? There is like no room to breathe here. Everything looks bulky and unthoughtful. Definitely not what we want. So based on this, the first guidelines are quite simple. And it's actually easier than it may sound. Just put whitespace between your elements, put whitespace between your groups of elements, put whitespace between your website's sections. But don't exaggerate, because when elements are spaced out too much, they may lose the relationships to one another. So don't use too much whitespace. You have to be careful with this. And with this, you will see how your website will look nice and clean, professionally designed. Now, with the whitespace that you add, you describe invisible relationships between the elements of your website. You communicate how the pieces of information relate to one another, and this is very important. So whitespace is closely related to something we call visual hierarchy. This is the organization of your content. Let's go back to our previous website example. Again, the text here is very small, but that's not what matters here. Just look at the way whitespace is used on this website to define the different sections. We can clearly see where each section begins just through the correct use of whitespace. And that's what hierarchy is all about, actually. So, again, whitespace is really powerful. Hierarchies give your website order, and so it's kind of important that you get it right. And how do you do it? Just design with having 3 simple guidelines in mind, and you should be fine. First, define where you want your audience to look first. Also, establish a flow that corresponds to your content's message. Because hierarchy is exactly that. It guides the user from one element to the next. And then, use whitespace to build that exact flow. So, concluding, in this lecture we learned that whitespace is a powerful tool to create a well-defined content hierarchy. Using whitespace right can make a website look clean and simple. So this was quite an important lecture. Now let's talk a little bit about user experience, because there can be no course about web design without at least mentioning user experience. So far, we focused essentially on visual design of user interfaces. Designing the user interface means to design the presentation of a product, like a website or a mobile application. It's designing the look and feel of the product. So that is what we've been looking at so far. Now, there's also another type of design which is very important, and that's the user experience design. User experience is the overall experience that the user has with a product. User experience includes the user interface, but also has to understand the whole picture of the product. It's not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. That is a very well-known quote from Steve Jobs about user interface and experience design. Now this picture is a good explanation of the difference between just designing the presentation of a product or designing the whole experience. So the bottle on the left side may be beautifully designed, but it doesn't solve the user's need to get ketchup out of the bottle as quick as possible. So the bottle on the right side tries to solve that problem by designing a pleasant overall user experience. It's also beautiful, but at the same time, it works. You can think of user experience in terms of users' goals and business goals. A user experience designer needs to align those goals so the business benefits when the user reaches their goal. Imagine, for example, that you're running a website where you want to give away for free an ebook in exchange for an email address. The user's goal here is to learn about the specific subject of your book, and your goal is to get the email address of your customers. For example, so you can try to sell them something later. Now, you gotta make sure that your design makes the best possible job in achieving both goals. User experience is a huge field and requires a lot of things to study and to analyze, but I felt like I should at least tell you some very basic things about it. I will also give you the link to a great free user experience crash course if you're interested. Find the link to that course in the ebook. Now it's time to talk about inspiration. Inspiration is absolutely essential, especially for a beginner like you. Believe me, without inspiration, you'll have a hard time to even start anything. Of course, you don't have to reinvent website layouts and user interface elements such as buttons or navigations. Instead of that, you should use other websites as inspiration in order to see what other leading designers are doing right. So here are some steps that you may follow. First, collect a bunch of designs that you like and that you think are well designed. Then understand everything about them by answering those questions. Why do they look good? What do these sites have in common? And how were they built in HTML and CSS? Now, in order to analyze the HTML and CSS code, you can use a Google Chrome developer tools if you're familiar with them. You can actually learn a lot by just doing this. Believe me, this is a very effective method. And the last thing I want to tell you about inspiration is to steal like an artist. Yes, you've heard that right. So basically, I want you to make your designs similar to web pages you like, at least at first. When you're starting out, don't worry so much about being original. Once you're getting better and better, then originality will come automatically. Of course, you should not literally copy anything, but you get the idea, right? So, where should you actually get inspiration? Don't worry, you will find some great websites in the ebook where you can find inspiration. For instance, Dribbble is a show and tell for designers and it's invite only, so the quality you'll find there is quite high. Basically, all great designers are there and you can learn a lot from them. We already saw some inspiration in many of the other lectures, so you can just go back and take a deeper look at those if you want.